We see the first sword, exhausted and maskless, reflecting on the progress they have made in the last 6 years. In the cave, they have trained 30 out of 300 people into assassins who could probably kill him at any moment with their skills. He feels his death is near and becomes emotional. Then, the second and third sword enter the room. They ask the first sword why he has taken off his mask. He says he feels suffocated by it after 6 years, and lets them do the same. They gather at the table and celebrate how their time in the cave is almost over. The first sword then asks for an update on the trainees' performance. The second sword reports that they have surpassed their expectations. Some are even stronger than the instructors. He says it is a pity to use them only once, but the first sword says they have no choice. That was one of the mission's conditions. He wants to start the final stage and puts 3 journals on the table. They call the trainees and announce that 3 of them must learn a martial art technique from the journals, and the other 27 must assassinate them. This creates confusion among the group. The masked men say this is their last training. Once they finish it, they will not force them anymore until they leave the cave. The group wonders if this is true, and Wolf thinks hard about his next move. The ones who learn the martial art will be hunted by the others, and the technique is probably much more advanced than what they have learned so far. He gets greedy, and volunteers first. Yayo is shocked and asks Wolf if he really wants to be the bait. Wolf replies and says he will find out if he is a bait or a wolf. Yayo warns Wolf to be careful, as he is now the main target. Time passes, and we see the second of the 3 who learned the martial art fall. After Wolf volunteered, no one else did, and the group had to draw lots. Song feels guilty about what he just did, but he had no choice. Wall is the only survivor among the 3 who learned the technique. Song goes back to the others and Min asks him about Wall. They haven't seen him for a while and wonder if he escaped outside. Yayo doubts it and says the last time she saw Wall was when they trained together a few days ago. Yolk proposes to attack the instructors instead, as that might be easier than killing Wool. Song agrees, but suspects the real ones have some kind of restriction on them. Yayo says they can deal with the restrictions later and need to concentrate on finding Wool first. They leave the cave and Wool watches them the whole time. He is surprised to hear that they considered going after the instructors rather than him. Wool realizes the instructors might be chasing the others, and there is no way they didn't hear their conversation. He thinks this is his opportunity to find out the real one's goal. Wool heeds to the real one's base. The base is heavily guarded, but Wool can handle it. Wool knows that by combining the turtle breathing technique with the thunder splitting technique, he can move without being noticed. Wool passes by the guards without any trouble. He reaches the deepest part of the base and assumes that what he is looking for is in this room. Wool opens the door and walks in. He starts looking for any clues to uncover any secrets. Then he finds a golden tube. He unrolls the scroll and sees the terms of their mission. They have to assassinate Wu Gunsang within 7 years for a reward of 500,000 yang. He is shocked and wonders how powerful Wu Gunsang is for them to train assassins for 7 years. He wants to know how one man's life is worth the lives of 270 people. Wool then hears someone coming and knows he has to get out fast. The first sword is rushing down the hall. As soon as the first sword breaks in, he can tell someone was in the room. Wool tried his best to tidy up, but it was sloppy. The second and third sword enter the base and meet the first sword. The first sword says someone has infiltrated their base and they have to find them before they escape. They try to guess who could have done this, but then they realize that no one is as talented as Wool. But they are clueless and don't even know Wool is hiding right above them. They are amazed that Wool would have the nerve to infiltrate their base when everyone else is after him. They talk about punishing Wool, but are afraid of a possible rebellion. The first sword says he has no choice but to use the hell flute. The second sword is shocked and says that is supposed to be a last resort restriction. The first sword asks if they are on board with the plan, and the second and third sword agree. Shortly after, the first sword stands at the edge of the cliff. The trainees have no idea what is about to happen as they are still looking for Wool. No one can find him, not even their best trackers. They suddenly hear the sound of an instrument. The sound causes a sharp pain in their bodies. They all fall to the ground and scream in pain. As they lie on the ground crying, Wool arrives. He feels no pain as the others feel their bodies burning. Wool concludes that they have activated the restriction. Wool looks around and sees everyone else in pain. He wonders why he is the only one pain-free. Wool wants to figure out the cause and decides to use internal energy infusion on Min. It is a very risky act, but it won't clash as much since Min has also learned the thunder-splitting cultivation technique. Wool performs his analysis on Min and sees no problems with her internal energy. He continues to look for any differences between them. They share the same food, same environment, and same martial art. Then it hits him. Poison. The restriction has something to do with poison, and now it makes sense why Wool feels no pain. He has developed a resistance to poison after being bitten by the snake so many times. Wool still wonders how they could affect 27 bodies at once. He thinks they must have mixed cursed poison in their food and are activating the poison through sound. He hears them call out for him and tries to think quickly. Wool decides not to run because he doesn't want them to find out about his resistance. He still doesn't want them to know he is different. So he lies on the ground and pretends to be in pain. They find Wool lying on the ground and call for the first sword. The first sword draws his blade and strikes down on Wool. The first sword wants to know what Wool was doing in his room. He also says Wool has done a great job hiding his true talents. The first sword pulls his blade out and says, "A nuisance like him is better off dead," but the second sword pleads with him not to. He says they need Wool to complete their mission. The first sword responds angrily and says the other trainees are enough. They both know that isn't true though. The second sword says they can control Wool by using the flute since he is clearly helpless against the curse poison. The first sword likes that idea and tells the masked men to give everyone the antidote. After the antidote, everyone recovers but they don't understand what happened. The first sword announces that the pain they just felt was all because of Wool, and this would have never happened if he didn't infiltrate their base. He warns them and says if anyone ever steps out of line again, remember the pain they experienced today. Later on, we see Wool reflecting on the events that transpired. He recalls the real ones, believing he was helpless against the poison. He is satisfied the snake venom neutralized the curse poison and allowed him to avoid the restriction. But once again, Wool hears footsteps down the hall. Min and the others are looking for Wool. Yayo can't believe Wool spends his time in this filthy place training. Yayo thinks Wool has no choice but to isolate himself, especially after the real ones blamed him for everything. Yoke gets impatient and shouts for Wool. Wool appears out of thin air and asks why they are looking for him. Wool scares them all and he asks again. Yayo says they just want to talk. She wants to know about the restriction. Yoke knows that. Wool knows about the restriction and says he wasn't there when everyone else collapsed, but when everyone regained their senses, he was right next to them. That means Wool appeared after the restriction was activated. Yayo figured out that the restriction had little to no effect on Wool. Then Min remembers when she was in pain. She was able to endure it because someone infused internal energy into her. She wonders if that someone was Wool. Yayo pressures Wool again and asks if he knows. Wool finally admits that he does. He tells them that he knows exactly what kind of restriction they put on them. Yolk demands that he tell them what it is, but Wool doesn't want to and asks why he should. Why should he go out of his way to help them? What is the benefit for him? Yolk gets angry and says, "This is not how someone treats their comrades." Comrades? Wool asks. Comrades wouldn't chase and attack each other with such hatred, he says. Yolk sees Wool's point of view and swears. From now on, they can be comrades. No matter what happens, he will always consider him a friend. Everyone sees through that, and Wool says he has to do more to earn his trust. Yolk praises Wool's attempt to act tough and says Wool would only benefit from having a friend like him. He invites him to the public floral performance troupe if they ever regain their freedom again. This way, Yolk will be able to help him at least a little. Yayo joins in and says she will also consider Wool a friend if he helps. She also adds that everyone in her group will never show him hostility. Min, feeling left out, says she will never betray Wool. Feeling fed up with all these lies, Wool spits out that the restriction is cursed poison. They ask for clarification. Wool says they were all poisoned by cursed poison. It is a type of poisonous organism. It normally stays dormant in their bodies, but it releases poison in response to the sound waves of the hell flute. The poison flows through their blood vessels and attacks their internal organs. Yoke then asks how Wool could resist the poison. Wool says he is naturally resistant to poison, so it doesn't affect him much. He says he has told them everything they need to know, and they can figure out how to remove the cursed poison on their own. Wool doesn't want to give them the full truth, as that could create countless variables. Yayo thanks him for the information and says he can come to her if he ever needs anything. Wool says he might take her up on that one day and they turn away. But Min catches Wool and tells him her real name is Lee Sol Min. Wool doesn't understand why he needs to know that, but she says she just wants him to remember it. Later on, the First Sword announces that they will be leaving the cave today. The trainees are happy to hear that, but they are still not sure if that is true. The First Sword calls for Yeo and tells her she is responsible for leading the others outside. She understands her mission, and the basket descends from the ceiling. As the real ones leave, they wonder how many of their trainees will survive. They trained them well, but their target is a martial artist with the highest level of talent in the Jianghu. The First Sword is relieved, though, as his job is now done and he can retire. The real ones make it outside and the trainees are ecstatic. This is the day they have waited for so long. Yayo takes charge and begins building their exit. Wool is relieved, but still feels it is too good to be true. Yayo walks up to Wool and asks him if he's ready for their mission. He says he is, and asks about the curse poison. Yayo says they were detoxified because Min knew a lot about poison. Most of the others have already left, and Yayo says it's their turn to go. The basket drops one last time, and they get on. As the basket rises, Wool looks down at the place he spent the last 7 years in. They were so deep underground, it might have been hell. They get close to the exit and Wool thinks to tear off his sleeve. They need to cover their eyes as they haven't seen daylight in years. The others realize they could be blinded and do the same. The light gets stronger as the basket rises, but they finally make it out. Before they can even look around, a man approaches the basket. "We seem to have made some useful ones," he says. Wool's eyes still haven't adjusted, and the man says the requester will be satisfied. He can't see him, but Wool thinks his voice sounds emotionless. He assumes this man is in a high position from the way he talks. He must be the captain of the Blood Shadow group, Wool thinks. Wool is right. He is Gu Yang, the Blood Shadow group captain. Gu orders them to be taken to the Clear Wind Manor. As they are being taken to the carriage, Wool looks back at Gu. He has memorized his voice. They reach the manor and Gu tells the trainees that this is where they will get used to the outside world. He warns them not to let their guard down, or he will deal with the consequences. Wool is placed in a dorm with Go and Yoke. Wool tells his new roommates that he's going to wash up at the well. Wool bathes and feels refreshed. He lies in the grass and enjoys the beautiful nature. He spends the night out in the grass and wakes up to a beautiful day. The others admire a flower they have never seen before. They can't believe they lived to see something so beautiful. But as they are rejoicing, here comes the captain. Gu drops some weapons on the ground in front of the trainees. He says they will now be given weapons, and they need to keep them safe. They will be using them soon, he says. Later on in the palace, we see Gu and the First Sword having a meeting. Gu is thanking his uncle, the First Sword, for all his hard work. The First Sword says he was just doing his job. Gu says the Blood Shadow group is prosperous thanks to the First Sword's hard work, and asks how he can repay him. But the First Sword says there is no favor to repay. If it weren't for the previous head, he would be dead. Gu then grants his uncle the option to retire, and the option is also available for the second and third sword. These are the words the First Sword has waited 7 years to hear. He then admits to his nephew that the trainees are a waste. They are too talented to throw away after one use. Gu shares the same belief, but he says he has no choice. The relationship with the trainees has to end here. The First Sword asks Gu if he knows who requested the mission. Gu says he doesn't know, but there is no reason to question anyone willing to pay 500,000 yang for a request. Gu then imagines the Blood Shadow group becoming the greatest assassin group in the world. Completing the mission would put them ahead of the 100 Wrath Union. After the meeting, we see Wool preparing for his mission with Yoke and a few other assassins. Yoke asks Wool if he's nervous, and Wool says he is a little. But they have spent so much time together now that Yoke can tell when Wool is lying. Wool accuses Yoke of being nervous because of how much he is talking as usual. Yoke gets defensive. Yoke says he wants nothing more than to get revenge on someone for his last 7 years of suffering. The group of assassins are now called to start their mission. They are told they will now be moving stealthily somewhere. This is what Wool has been waiting for. They head out into the night and follow the fourth sword. The newly trained group is keeping up with the fourth sword, and he is impressed. They have clearly been trained well. He also thinks how much of a waste their talent would be after being used once. They reach their target location, and the fourth sword tells them to hide here for now. The assassins all hide, and the fourth sword tells them their target lives within that mountain. He explains the mission and says once they climb the mountain, they will see a manor that looks exactly like the one they were living in underground. Among the buildings, the man inside the Bright Moon Palace is their target. The assassins are eager to get started as they know that building well. Wool is the only one in the group who knows their target is Wu Gunsang. We are now brought to a woman staring off into the distance. Her name is Young. She is admiring some flowers and one stands out to her. She reaches out to touch it and the flower instantly evaporates. As Young processes what just happened, she hears someone calling for her. It is Solran, the emissary sect leader, and she wants to know what Young was doing outside alone. Young says she was just trying to catch the nice breeze. Ran asks Young if she still holds a grudge against her. Young says not really, but her life is on the line with this request, and she would have preferred to be excused from it. Ran is annoyed and doesn't appreciate Young's attitude. Ran tells Young she must have forgotten who took her in when she was just a beggar on the streets. She says she better not want to be excused after everything she has done for her. Young apologizes and doesn't want Ran to be upset, as it is bad for her health. Ran says if they don't get an answer today, they will carry out their original plan. Young agrees, as she is always ready to follow her master. As the conversation ends, a messenger comes running with news. The messenger tells Ran that they have accepted the proposal. This is great news for the sect, and Ran tells Young the fate of their sect now depends on her performance. Young assures Ran that she has nothing to worry about. Ran thinks to herself how disappointed she is that she has to waste a talent like Young as a political tool instead of her successor. The messenger asks Ran what they should do about the other matter. Ran asks if he is, referring to the request for 500 Sindan Yang. Only time will tell what Ran has in store for the Blood Shadow group. We now see Wool waking up and wondering if it is still morning. He knows the mission will be carried out at night, so they still have some time left. He lies back down to rest, but something feels wrong to him. Suddenly a spear drops down and strikes one of the other assassins. Wool is shocked as he and the other assassins are under attack.